So go forward to the first one. Okay, so like I mentioned, we're going to shift to talking about some other hardware now, and that is science payloads, which is another critical piece of doing field science on another planet. So with our Artemis science payloads, we are obviously hoping to address or targeting decadal level, as well as our science definition team prioritized science goals at the South Pole of the Moon. And the three themes that were outlined in the decadal survey were solar system origin and early history, geologic processes of early Earth that are preserved on the moon, and then volatile origin and delivery processes. And doing those sort of big science investigations with crew requires the right tools, and critical among those tools are deployed instruments. And we have a specific definition of deployed instruments for the purposes of our solicitations for payloads. So deployed instruments are autonomous instrument packages that are installed on the lunar surface by astronauts during EVA. And those particular types of instruments were part of the 3-component science campaign that was outlined in the science definition team, with the recommendation that, that NASA considers the Artemis 3 mission an opportunity to deploy the first of a series of geophysical and environmental networked nodes. Next chart. So deployed instruments on Apollo is the model that we're building from. We haven't really done this since then. So we're kind of building the ship as we're sailing it. So the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment Package, or ALSEP, was deployed on all Apollo surface missions, building both in size and capability from Apollo 11 all the way through Apollo 17. Examples of deployed instruments include the active seismic experiment, the passive seismic experiment, which is the one that's shown, heat flow experiment, atmosphere composition experiment, lunar surface magnetometer, and several other types of primarily geophysical instruments that were deployed during Apollo. And those data are still leading to new scientific discoveries in the present day. So instruments are a very important part of lunar science with astronauts. Next chart. So as many of you may know, we have an instrument call open right now. The step 1 deadline has passed, and the step 2 deadline is approaching at the end of August. And that's under the F.12 appendix in roses on end spires. So it's a solicitation specifically for deployed instruments for Artemis 3. So it's exclusive of what we call handheld instruments or instruments that are mounted onto the lander. Instruments like those will be solicited at a future date for future missions. Instruments themselves could either be standalone or part of a suite. Like the geology team, members of the payload teams will become part of the overall Artemis science team. And the payloads can either depend upon the assets that will be on the surface while the humans are on the surface, and therefore last only for the length of the surface mission, or they can be self-sustaining, have their own power and communication, and will provide funding for 3 months of continuous operation after the departure of the astronauts. Next chart. So obviously the instruments have to be relevant to the science objectives that are laid out in the Artemis Science Plan and the Artemis Science Definition Team Report. I won't read through those word for word, but they're there and they're in those other documents if you want to dive into that. And again, of particular interest are geophysical monitoring, environmental monitoring, and also understanding the human impact on the moon. And now with the inclusion of biological physical sciences into the overall Science Mission Directorate umbrella, we're also soliciting those types of investigations as long as they demonstrate relevance to the appropriate priorities in the Science Definition Team Report. So we aren't soliciting any tech demonstrations, which is different from at least the earlier CLIPS payload solicitations. And we are also not soliciting purely ISRU related instruments. So we have to have a science objective. So at least for the current solicitation, key information is here. We had a cost cap of $25 million per instrument. a mass not to exceed 31.3 kilograms, which is based on our current understanding of crew lifting limitations. So how much can a single suited crew member reasonably manipulate on the moon? And because of the short development cycle for this first mission, we requested a preferred technology readiness level of 6 entry TRL. So again, I mentioned already the different options for operations, and sorry, my computer just popped up a little message. But payloads have to be powered independently, so they won't be able to rely on the Starship vehicle for power during operations on the surface, although we do anticipate the vehicle being able to provide power for charging and conditioning during the cruise and loiter phases of the missions. We were requesting 4 versions of each instrument. So the flight unit, training units, which will be used in the field to train the astronauts, and an engineering unit, which is used to test interfaces with the Starship. Crew time, we requested to be minimized just because, during the first mission, we just don't anticipate there being a lot of time to do very, very lengthy or complicated deployments. So we required folks to consider minimizing the amount of crew time, but if more is needed, then just make sure that it's strongly justified. And then the biggest thing that I think is sort of a departure from a lot of almost all of our other solicitations for instruments across the agency is the requirement to adhere to the crew safety and human factors design requirements. And that's a big part of the challenge in putting this solicitation together, is that we haven't had to do that. And so we're writing those procedures as we go. Okay, so I think I might be getting close to the end of my 5 minutes, and I think this is also my last chart. So I will just end there. Or maybe I might have one more chart after this one. Yeah. So we do give, obviously as much information as we currently have about the mission architecture for Artemis 3, about the Starship concept of operations, what those human factors and safety concerns look like, what the power and comm restrictions are. So there's a lot of detail in the solicitation if you're interested in reading that, or just kind of like learning more about how we envision payloads being a critical part of crewed missions going forward. And of course, we are also planning to I think I got one more chart after this. I just remembered my last note. 2 more instrument solicitations coming in Roses 2023, and that is for the lunar terrain vehicle, so LTV mounted payloads, and also for the second crewed landing deployed instrumentation. And so that is my official end, and I will stop now.